Good morning, beautiful people of the center. As you, as you heard from our host, this month we're focusing on silence as a spiritual practice. But one thing we do not wish to be silent about is our acknowledgement of the veterans who have served our country. So if you are a veteran, I ask you to stand and remain standing so I can read to you words from our President's proclamation. Please, veterans, stand. Please remain standing while I let you know what the President proclaimed. President Barack Obama said, through the generations, your courage and sacrifice has allowed our republic to flourish. And today, a nation acknowledges its profound debt of gratitude to the patriots who have kept it whole. As we pay tribute to our veterans, we are mindful that no ceremony or parade can fully repay that debt. We remember that our obligations endure long after the return. And then he goes on to say, I call on all Americans, including civic and fraternal organizations and places of worship, to support this day with commemorative expressions. So, on behalf of all of the people of this nation who have benefited from your service, I say thank you very much. Well, for those of you joining us, or perhaps you weren't here last week, I'll just do a quick recap of what we've been talking about in this focus on silence as a spiritual practice. And thank you to the many people who wrote to me and said how much they appreciated how I reframed the words. You know, our textbook was written in the 30s, so it's got some really old conventions. So we've been reframing the words, and as a way of recapping, I brought the first slide from last week. Let's have that slide. It's the next one. There we go. So it goes, if we know that God is forever right where we are, and it talks about God and our Father and Him, and so I changed it on the next slide. This is how I read it on the go. Next slide, please. There we go. If we know that Spirit is forever right where we are, we shall not be reaching out in every direction for it. We enter the inner chamber of our mind and close the door on all discord and confusion and commune with divinity, our spiritual consciousness, our power within. So then, the silence is our communion with that Spirit. It is our awareness of our unity with the all-good. It is our understanding that it is that power within us that's doing all the work in our life. So that's the summation of where we are and the definition of what is the silence. The silence is your personal communion with the thing itself, divinity. So it's got to be personal to you and personal to me, each in our own way. Some things we noted is that silence is not the absence of noise, although peace and quiet is helpful, right? And the silence isn't in a particular location, although a clean environment without distractions and tidiness is helpful. But rather, the silence is something that you and I have access to all the time, no matter where we are, no matter when it is, because we carry it with us where we go. I was remembering that a dear friend of mine told me that her favorite place to practice the silence is at an airport. And she says the way it is for her at the airport, she gets there and everybody's so caught up in everything, getting to the right gate, the insistent announcements of impending danger, keeping us on high alert, the vendors with all their signs, and then the security checks and announcements and rushing and this and that, all competing for attention. So what she does, she arrives and she walks in a very mindful way, very leisurely through everything, unhurriedly, so that she can watch what her attention is doing as she goes through it. She wants to take conscious note of any tendency her body has to bunch up. And she goes, oh, I've departed. And then so she comes back to the quiet presence within. And she's of the opinion that her practicing of the silence in the airport is benefiting the whole airport. And I'm inclined to believe with her. Because I find that when I'm around somebody who's situated in peace, I can be too. And it's a reminder to me that I can't always have the perfect environment on the outside for my practice, and that ought not to get in the way of me doing my thing, practicing peace. And that's what the spiritual resource guide is all about. We gave these away on Wednesday evening, Silence and Retreat as Spiritual Practices, and they're available in the bookstore now. It's 8 weeks of suggested activities for you and I to practice fostering a sense of that inner silence in our lives, not in some place removed from our life, in the ordinary activities of our life, in a mindful way. There's even a beautiful guide for you and I to plan out our own personal retreat experience without having to relocate. That's what this is about. And that brings us up to this week, and the topic is Be Here Now. It's a reference to something in our teaching that we call the eternal now. The eternal present moment. It's a very important idea in our teaching. And it goes something like this. There is only one reality. And it's this present moment. There's no other time. And there's no other experience that you and I can be in other than this right now. No matter when or where my mind travels to, the only available experience is this one right now, and nothing else exists. You get the idea? That's all there is. And do you know that out of this teaching of the eternal present moment comes so many of our other teachings? Like the teaching about forgiveness rises up from that, because for me to live in a state of forgiveness and flow, it's logical that I'm going to have to give up loyalty to what happened, what might happen. If I want to be here with you fully, and instead my mind is on then, I'm not here and now. I'm then and when. We had a speaker come speak here, Dr. William Larkin from the Applied Neuroscience Institute. He was very well received. And since he spoke here, I subscribed to his email newsletter, and the recent one that came out is about cueing your brain for peace. And he talks in it about the dangerous habit that we human beings have of negatively visualizing what we see in the future. And it's so subtle the way we do it that we don't always realize that we're doing it. So it's kind of an invisible habit of not being in the present moment. And maybe you'll recognize yourself, as I did when I was reading that. I thought about a conversation I was recently having with a friend who I love. And as she was talking, I realized I hadn't heard the last 5 sentences. You know what I'm talking about? because I was anxiously going over in my head a distressing situation that had happened, while at the same time I was reviewing multiple possible outcomes. Does anybody do that? Yeah. Simultaneously in the past and in the future, nobody home. And I was missing the beautiful, innocent outpouring of her expression. And I didn't want to say to her, I'm sorry, but your beautiful, innocent expression is not as interesting as my worry. But I took it to heart. I thought about it. And Dr. Larkin says in the newsletter, it makes a real important point. He says, whether it's real or imagined, it doesn't matter, because negative visualization from our imagination, it kicks the brain into fight or flight mode, and it releases stress hormones into our biology. And the result is, in the next slide, that we can go through life on physiological high alert when there is really very little going on around you, except in what you have negatively created in your own brain. So I read that and I just realized, I know, I catch myself out sometimes. I'll be sitting in the car and there's nothing going on around me, but my hands are on the steering wheel like this and my shoulders are up there. I'm ready for war, in the moment I was like, whoa, and you can try that. Maybe even in the sanctuary I find it sometimes. It's like, okay. Oh, the layers of being able to release that are available to come into the moment. And my belly, just come home. It makes me think of worrying, because I grew up in a family where worrying was a spiritual practice. In fact, worrying is, if you weren't worrying, it meant there was something wrong with you. You weren't being realistic. You had to be worried. In fact, worry was how you showed that you truly cared. But I learned something new at the Center for Spiritual Living. I'm very glad I did. I learned that worry is creative. It's how you create anxiety. Yes, that's the recipe. It's the use of your imagination to create negative pictures of possible future outcomes, and that creates anxiety. And anxiety is self-sustaining then. Once you get it in motion, it self-produces, and you can leave it to run inside your biology while you think you're having a good time. And I notice sometimes I am more loyal to my practice of worry than I am to my practice of peace. I will devote more time to my spiritual practice of worry than I will devote to my spiritual practice of... It's interesting. Loyalties. So I learned some good news, both at the center and in Dr. Larkin's newsletters, that we can do something about that if we're willing to take on 3 important skills. And the first important skill to develop is this: to begin to be able to notice when it's happening. This is the first important skill. Notice it's happening so that you can start to pay attention to what is going on inside of you, and when you're starting to create negative pictures about the past or about the future, and then you can use that notice as a cue for yourself to use your mind, we'd say our consciousness, in a different way. That's the first thing, notice. And the second important skill is to develop the willingness to return to the present moment. You've got to be willing to abandon the negative mind picturing. And the ways to return to this moment are, for example, one way would be, to literally announce to yourself, be here now. So I use that. I catch myself, be here, now. Or another way is to do that body scan. It just takes a moment and to look. Oh, the shoulders. Oh, the hands. Oh, the breathing. And as you go through that, inviting your body to relax, it allows the present to become available. And the third way is the breathing, sometimes just to pay attention to I notice sometimes when I'm up there, I'm not breathing. So to begin to breathe deeply and rhythmically is a way of arriving in the moment. So the first skill is to notice. The second skill is to return to the present. And then the third important skill to develop is, in that moment of relief that we create when we return, is to cue your mind and your imagination to think up something good. I mean, after all, if you're going to future trip, it might be a good one. Why not? Make it a good trip. And this is the creative part. I tell myself, why not be more loyal to this part? The doctor in his newsletter, he says, when we're making up something good, we're to keep imagining it over and over again, and then in great detail go over the details and imagine what plans you might have to put in practice to bring it about, and then come back to the image over and over and over again and refine the details and change the elements and make it better and grander and more wonderful, and spend as much time on it as you would spend worrying. So you already know how to do this. One of our members, Joan Logan, sent me an email message after last week's service about listening to the silence, and she said something lovely in it. She said, for her, the balm for restlessness is mindfulness. Slowing down to stillness, and then silence come. And I thought about these three strategies: notice, return, create anew. It's a mindfulness practice. And by the way, she also included in that email a lovely poem about restlessness. I thought I'd bring it along because it's such a great commentary on what we're talking about. So the first slide, I'll read it to you. I am here, O Lord, command me. But wait, before you say anything, I have an idea. Let's say that this certain thing is the divine manifestation of your will. You know it's true. What? Oh, what's that? Oh, of course, sorry. I'll listen now. But it's a good idea. I mean, how could it not be? I mean, ultimately it's yours, right? Next slide. What? Oh, yes, you're right. Sorry, I'll be quiet now. But then you see, of course you see, in serving this certain thing, I would be serving you. I know. I'll settle down now. See, I'm being still. Oh, Lord, command me. I'm ready this time. Really. But I've been thinking, isn't that delightful? It reminded me, to be here now. Be present, Edward. Stop being concerned with what you'll miss. I had a great lesson in Bali. I was traveling with a bunch of people I love very much, and one of my friends from this community, I asked him to take a photograph of me standing at this World Heritage site because I wanted to put it on my Facebook page. So he took the picture, captured it perfectly. Can I have the slide? Except for one thing, is that the World Heritage site is behind me. Can I see the next slide, please? Yeah, that's where it is. But here's what I learned. He was so gleefully engaged in the idea of taking a beautiful picture that he paid no attention to what was in the background. And it reminded me that sometimes I am so focused on what is in the background, read the past, that I'm missing exactly what is in front of me. You know, I get more joy out of this picture and the memory of this picture than I get out of any detail about the World Heritage Site. Because it stands for, every time I see it, it stands for me as a reminder to be here now. For a moment, forget the rest. You know, I have a very busy job, and I've learned how to manage my time and do all sorts of efficiency tricks to keep myself multitasking and doing much more productive. Do. But you know, those skills are not so good for spiritual practice. When it comes to spiritual practice, the same techniques are not as effective because you may be able to crank up the speed and produce more at work and multitask, but in the spiritual practice, once it starts spilling into your spiritual practice, you go in the opposite direction. In my inner work, what I'm aiming for is a different goal. I'm aiming for an experience of oneness, of single-mindedness, of living fully available to what is right with me, to being in that spot where it's like time stops, in that moment in which whatever is right before me occupies all of my attention, to the point where the background is irrelevant. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, on the next slide wrote these words: if we were to attempt to put a finger on any period of time, it would be gone before we could point to it. For yesterday is gone, and tomorrow has not yet come, and today is rapidly slipping past. I've always loved those words, to remind me that now is not a moment that we can locate. It's not an event. It's an experience. It's an awareness. It's a feeling, I would say, of what it feels like to be a witness, to watch, to be still. It is a realization of the inner silence. Now I'm thinking about when I leave today. I'm going to the airport, so I get to practice like my friend did. And I wondered about you. How much busyness are you going to be exposed to right away? And are you going to drop right into it? I'm preaching to myself. Are you going to let the world set your pace? Or are you going to let the world dictate your reality? Or are you going to be the peace that you wish to see? Maybe you can interrupt your plans and do something that will help you stay in your peace. Maybe a deep, long, slow conversation with somebody you love. Maybe sitting out in the garden before it becomes too cold to do so, to stare at the changing nature. Or maybe you'll take your peace to the mall and spread it about. Right? Why not? So all this talk of the silence in the present moment, does it mean that we should not look to the future? No, not at all. But it does mean that when we plan for the future and look to the future, we do it from the silence within, and that changes everything. Best expressed by Christian D. Larson in Pathway of the Roses. When I look into the future, I am not anxious about methods or means to carry out what the future moment may demand. When I come to that place, God will be there. The limitless powers of infinite life will be there. The wisdom, the light, and the luminous understanding of my highest spiritual nature will be there. All of me will be there. And the power of my faith to draw upon the limitless for any desire or need will also be there. I know that all things are mine now, and the now that now is eternal. I invite you to breathe in with me and exhale, letting your eyes close. And in this moment of quiet contemplation, I invite you to say your own prayer of peace. My inner guide keeps me on the pathway of life and directs me at all times to that which is right and best. I shall never be without this witness of the Spirit, for I believe in it and accept it as the great companion of the soul. And so it is.